The dust swirled across the weathered boardwalk as Fiona Turner pressed her forehead against the glass of her father's general store, watching 12-year-old Xavier Owens mount his father's horse with all the awkward determination a boy his age could muster. It was the summer of 1876 in Kingston, Nevada, and the midday sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town that had sprung up like a stubborn weed in the unforgiving desert landscape. "I promise I will come back for you, Fiona," Xavier called out, his voice cracking slightly as he struggled to control the massive chestnut stallion beneath him. "When we are grown, I will come back and marry you proper." Fiona's heart fluttered in her chest, her blonde braids bouncing as she nodded vigorously. "I will wait for you, Xavier Owens, forever and ever." Mr. Owens placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "Come along, boy. California's a long ride from here, and your mother's waiting at the wagon." Tears stung Fiona's eyes as she watched the Owens family depart Kingston, their wagon disappearing into the shimmering heat of the Nevada desert. Her father's hand settled on her shoulder, heavy with sympathy. "Forever's a mighty long time, Fiona," he said softly. But in her 12-year-old heart, forever didn't seem long enough. 8 years later, in the summer of 1884, Fiona Turner stood behind the counter of her father's general store, tallying the day's receipts with practiced efficiency. At 20, she had grown into a striking young woman with golden hair that fell in soft waves past her shoulders and eyes the color of the Nevada sky at dawn. "Miss Turner, might I trouble you for some tobacco?" The deep voice of Sheriff Miller interrupted her concentration. "Of course, Sheriff." She reached for the tin on the shelf behind her, her movements graceful and measured. "Will that be all?" The sheriff nodded, his weathered face creasing into a smile beneath his graying mustache. "Your father mentioned you've had another offer from young Bradley Evans." Fiona's smile tightened slightly. "Mr. Evans is persistent, I'll grant him that. He's a good man, owns half the mining claims north of town." The sheriff studied her face carefully. "Your father worries about you, Fiona. 20 years old and turning down every suitable bachelor in Kingston." "I appreciate the concern," she replied, her tone polite but firm. "But I'm quite content running the store with my father." What she didn't say was that every man who came calling was measured against a memory, a promise made by a boy on horseback 8 years earlier. A foolish thing to hold on to, she knew, but her heart refused to let it go. The bell above the door jingled as her father entered, his once strong frame now slightly stooped with age. "Afternoon, Sheriff. Fiona, there's a wagon needs unloading out back." As Fiona stepped into the alley behind the store, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dirt. She squinted at the unfamiliar wagon, loaded with crates of supplies. "Mr. Turner said to bring these round back," called a voice from the driver's seat. Fiona shielded her eyes, trying to make out the man's features. "Just set them down there. I'll have my father come check the order." The driver jumped down with an easy grace that caught her attention. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in trail-worn clothes with a Stetson pulled low over his face. As he lifted the first crate, muscles rippled beneath his dusty shirt. "You're not from Kingston," she observed, arms crossed over her chest. "Not anymore." He set down the crate and straightened, finally pushing his hat back to reveal a face that had haunted her dreams for 8 years. Fiona felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Xavier?" His eyes, those same deep brown eyes she remembered, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Hello, Fiona." She took an involuntary step backward, her hand flying to her throat. You're here. I told you I'd come back." Xavier Owens stood before her, no longer the gangly boy who'd ridden away, but a man hardened by sun and wind with a quiet confidence in his stance. That was 8 years ago. Children's promises aren't meant to be kept. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, as if someone else was speaking. Some promises are. He took a step toward her, then stopped, respecting the invisible barrier between them. I've thought about you every day since we left Kingston. Fiona felt a flush of anger rise in her cheeks. 8 years without a word, Xavier, not a single letter. Pain flickered across his face. I wanted to write, but, Fiona. Her father's voice called from inside the store. What's taking so long? She tore her gaze away from Xavier. Nothing, father, just discussing the delivery. She turned back to Xavier, her voice lowered. You should finish unloading. My father is waiting. Xavier nodded, reaching for another crate. We have a lot to talk about, Fiona. I'm staying at the Silver Dollar Inn. When you're ready to listen, I'll be there. As Fiona returned to the store, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Xavier Owens had returned to Kingston, just as he'd promised. But she was no longer the starry-eyed 12-year-old who'd watched him ride away. 8 years had taught her that dreams and promises were as insubstantial as the dust that blew through Kingston's streets. That night, sleep eluded Fiona. She tossed in her bed, memories swimming through her mind like fish in a stream. She remembered Xavier teaching her to skip stones across the creek outside town. The two of them sitting on the schoolhouse steps sharing an apple, the solemnity in his young face when he promised to return for her. At breakfast, her father studied her over his coffee cup. You look like you've seen a ghost, daughter. Fiona pushed her eggs around her plate. Xavier Owens is back in town. Her father's fork clattered against his plate. Benjamin Owens' boy. The one who moved to California, she nodded, not meeting his eyes. He was the delivery man yesterday. Well, I'll be. Her father leaned back in his chair. That explains why you've been walking around like you're in a fog. You two were thick as thieves as children. We were just friends, father. Is that why you've turned down every suitor since the day the Owens family left town? His voice was gentle, without accusation. Fiona looked up sharply. That's not fair. Maybe not. He reached across the table to pat her hand. But it's true, isn't it? You've been waiting for that boy. I was 12, father. It was a childish fancy. And now? She stood abruptly, gathering the breakfast dishes. Now I'm a grown woman who knows better than to put stock in childhood promises. Her father watched her with knowing eyes. Whatever you say, daughter. The general store was busy that morning, which Fiona welcomed as a distraction. She focused on measuring fabric for Mrs. Peterson, weighing sugar for the hotel cook, and filling orders for the miners who came in with dust-covered boots and sun-reddened faces. It was nearly noon when the door opened and Xavier walked in, causing every head in the store to turn. He'd cleaned up since yesterday, his dark hair neatly combed, wearing a fresh shirt and vest. He nodded politely to the other customers before approaching the counter. Miss Turner, he said formally, removing his hat. I was hoping to purchase some supplies. Fiona felt the curious gazes of the other patrons. Kingston was a small town and news traveled fast. By now, everyone probably knew that Xavier Owens had returned after 8 years away. Of course, Mr. Owens, she replied, matching his formal tone. What do you require? As she filled his order coffee, flour, bacon, and ammunition, they maintained a careful distance, speaking only of the items he needed. When the transaction was complete, Xavier leaned slightly closer. Might I call on you properly? Perhaps tomorrow evening, Fiona hesitated, aware of Mrs. Peterson pretending not to eavesdrop nearby. I'm quite busy with the store, Mr. Owens. The store closes at 6, does it not? His eyes held her steadily. I could call at 7. Something in his unwavering gaze broke through her defenses. Very well, 7 o'clock. The smile that spread across his face reminded her so much of the boy she'd known that her heart ached. Until tomorrow, then. After he left, Mrs. Peterson sidled up to the counter. My goodness, was that Xavier Owens? He's grown into quite the handsome man. Her eyes twinkled with gossip. I recall how inseparable you two were as children. Fiona straightened the display of canned goods with more force than necessary. That was a long time ago, Mrs. Peterson. Not so very long, the older woman mused. And from the way he was looking at you, I'd say some things haven't changed at all. The following evening, Fiona found herself changing her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue cotton that brought out the color in her eyes. She pinned her hair up, then let it down, then compromised by pulling back only the sides with pearl combs that had belonged to her mother. Her father watched her nervous preparations with amusement. I thought this was just a childhood fancy. I merely wish to look presentable, she replied primly, adjusting one of the combs. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock came at the door. Her father answered it, ushering Xavier into their small parlor attached to the back of the store. Young Mr. Owens, her father greeted him warmly. It's been many years. Xavier shook his hand firmly. Too many, sir. It's good to see you again. Fiona entered the parlor and Xavier's gaze immediately found her. Something in his expression made her cheeks warm. Miss Turner, he said softly, you look beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Owens. She gestured to a chair. Please sit down. Her father cleared his throat. Well, I have some ledgers to review in the store. I'll leave you young people to catch up. With a meaningful look at Fiona, he retreated through the door that connected to the general store. An awkward silence settled between them until Xavier finally spoke. You're probably wondering why I never wrote. Fiona looked down at her hands. I assumed you forgot about Kingston, about me. Never. The vehemence in his voice made her look up. I tried to write dozens of times, but the letters never seemed right, and then... He paused, his expression darkening. Things got complicated in California. What happened after you left? She asked softly. Xavier leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We settled near Sacramento. My father started a freight business, and for a while, things were good. Then he got sick consumption. He died when I was 15. Oh, Xavier, I'm so sorry. After that, everything fell apart. My mother couldn't run the business alone, so we sold it. But the money didn't last, and soon we were struggling. I took whatever work I could find: ranch hand, freight driver, even tried my hand at mining. His mouth twisted in a humorless smile. I was determined to make something of myself before I came back to Kingston, before I came back to you. You didn't need to prove anything to me, Fiona said quietly. I made a promise, Fiona. I said I'd come back and marry you proper. How could I do that as a penniless drifter? His eyes held hers, intense and earnest. A man's word has to mean something. And your mother, is she well? A shadow passed over Xavier's face. She remarried 3 years ago, a shopkeeper in Sacramento. He's a good man, treats her well. He hesitated. She's the one who finally convinced me to come back to Kingston. Said I'd spent too long chasing my fortune when what I really wanted was here all along. Fiona's heart quickened. And what was that, you? He said simply. It's always been you, Fiona. She stood abruptly, moving to the window. We were children, Xavier. We can't pick up where we left off, pretending those 8 years didn't happen. He rose and followed her, stopping a respectful distance away. I'm not asking to. I'm asking for a chance to know the woman you've become, to let you know the man I am now. Fiona turned to face him, searching his eyes for any hint of deception. All she found was the same earnest honesty she remembered from their childhood. I'm not the same girl who watched you ride away, she warned. I would hope not. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That girl was 12, and it would be highly inappropriate for me to call on her now. Despite herself, Fiona laughed. You always could make me smile even when I was determined to be cross with you. Does that mean you'll give me a chance?" Hope brightened his features. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "A chance, Xavier, nothing more." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That's all I ask." In the days that followed, Xavier became a regular visitor to the Turner General Store. He helped unload deliveries, fixed the loose board on the back step, and generally made himself useful whenever he could. The townsfolk watched with interest as the prodigal son of Kingston rekindled his friendship with Fiona Turner. "He's sweet on you," observed Elsie Parker, Fiona's closest friend, as they sat on the porch of the Parker home one Sunday afternoon. "Half the town is talking about it." Fiona sipped her lemonade, pretending nonchalance. "People always talk. He's handsome," Elsie continued, her dark eyes twinkling. "And he looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. We were childhood friends, nothing more." "That's not what I hear, Mrs. Peterson says he promised to marry you before he left town." Fiona nearly choked on her lemonade. "We were 12 years old. And now you're not," Elsie pointed out. "And neither is he. So what are you waiting for?" It was a question Fiona asked herself repeatedly over the next few weeks. Xavier had been nothing but respectful, never pushing beyond the boundaries of friendship she had established. They went on proper walks around town. He escorted her to church on Sundays and occasionally joined her and her father for dinner. Yet something held her back from fully opening her heart to him again. Perhaps it was fear that if she let herself love him, he might disappear once more, leaving another 8-year void in her life. One warm evening in late July, Xavier invited her to walk by the creek where they had played as children. The setting sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson as they strolled along the bank, reminiscing about their childhood adventures. "Remember when you fell in trying to catch that frog?" Xavier laughed. "I wouldn't have fallen if you hadn't startled me," Fiona retorted, smiling at the memory. "My mother was furious when I came home soaking wet." "You were always braver than me," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "Always willing to wade right into the creek while I tested the waters first." They reached a fallen log that spanned the narrow part of the creek, something they had used as a bridge in their youth. Xavier stepped onto it first, balancing easily, then extended his hand to Fiona. "Still trust me?" he asked softly. Fiona looked at his outstretched hand, then into his eyes. Slowly, she placed her palm against his. "I'm trying to." He helped her onto the log and they crossed together, hands still joined even after they reached the other side. They walked a little farther, finding a grassy clearing where the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees. "Why did you really come back to Kingston?" Fiona asked suddenly. "The truth, Xavier." He turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable. "Because I never stopped thinking about a promise I made when I was 12 years old. Because every place I went, every job I took, every dollar I saved was all with one purpose: to come back to you." 8 years is a long time," she whispered. "Too long," he agreed. "I should have come back sooner, but I was stubborn. Thought I needed to make something of myself first. And have you made something of yourself?" Xavier reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded document. "See for yourself." Fiona took the paper, unfolding it carefully. It was a deed to a parcel of land just outside Kingston. "It's not much yet," Xavier said, watching her face. 40 acres with a small cabin I've been fixing up, but it's mine, free and clear. Bought it with money I saved working cattle drives and guarding gold shipments." "You bought land here?" Her voice was faint with surprise. "I told you I was coming back to stay." He took a step closer. "I'm not the same boy who left, Fiona. I've seen more of the world than I ever wanted to, worked harder than I thought possible. But through it all, one thing never changed." "What's that?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. My feelings for you. He reached up tentatively to brush a strand of hair from her face. I loved you when we were 12, though I barely understood what that meant. Now I'm a man, and I know exactly what I'm saying when I tell you I love you still. Fiona trembled at his touch, at the sincerity in his words. I want to believe you, Xavier. But how can I trust that you won't leave again? Because Kingston is my home. You are my home. He gestured to the deed still in her hands. And now I have roots here again. I'm not going anywhere, Fiona, not without you. The last of her resistance crumbled as she looked into his eyes, seeing the boy she'd loved and the man he'd become. I never stopped loving you either, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Even when I tried to convince myself it was foolish. Xavier's smile was radiant as he cupped her face in his hands. May I kiss you, Miss Turner? Her answer was to rise on her tiptoes, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that deepened as he wrapped his arms around her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I've been waiting 8 years to do that, Xavier murmured against her hair. Fiona laughed softly. Was it worth the wait? Every second. He pressed his forehead to hers. But I don't intend to wait that long for the next one. As summer turned to autumn, Xavier Owens became a fixture in Kingston. He took odd jobs around town, worked on improving his land, and spent every free moment with Fiona. The townsfolk watched with approval as the childhood sweethearts found their way back to each other. On a crisp October evening, Fiona sat at her dressing table, preparing for dinner at Xavier's newly completed cabin. He had been mysterious about the invitation, insisting that he had something important to show her. You look beautiful, her father said from the doorway, his eyes misty with emotion. Fiona smoothed her best dress, a deep green velvet that complemented her fair coloring. It's just dinner, father, he chuckled, shaking his head. If you believe that, you're not as observant as I thought. Before she could question him further, a knock announced Xavier's arrival. He stood in their parlor, looking more handsome than ever in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, freshly shaved. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. Xavier had brought his wagon, and as they drove out of town, Fiona noticed he seemed unusually nervous. Is everything all right? Perfect, he assured her, though his knuckles were white where he gripped the reins. Just perfect. As they approached his property, Fiona gasped. The cabin was aglow with lantern light, and a stone path lined with more lanterns led from the gate to the front door. Wildflowers had been gathered in bunches and placed along the path. Xavier, what is all this? He helped her down from the wagon, his eyes shining with emotion. I wanted tonight to be special. The inside of the cabin was just as thoughtfully prepared. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. The table was set with the finest dishes Xavier could procure, and the delicious aroma of roast beef filled the air. Did you cook? Fiona asked, surprised. Xavier laughed. I tried, but Mrs. Johnson from the hotel took pity on me and helped. I'm afraid my culinary skills are still somewhat lacking. They ate by candlelight, talking and laughing, more at ease with each other than they had been since his return. After dinner, Xavier led her to the hearth, where they sat side by side on a bench he had crafted himself. You remember the day I left Kingston? He asked quietly. Fiona nodded, the memory still vivid after all these years. You promised you'd come back and marry me proper. I meant every word. Xavier took her hands in his expression serious. I know I made you wait far too long and I can never get those years back, but if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Slowly, he slid from the bench to one knee before her, pulling a small box from his pocket. Fiona Turner, I promised you forever when we were just 12 years old. I'm here now to keep that vow if you'll have me. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small diamond that caught the firelight. Fiona's eyes filled with tears as she looked from the ring to Xavier's hopeful face. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Xavier Owens, I will marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The wedding of Xavier Owens and Fiona Turner became the social event of the season in Kingston. On a bright November morning in 1884, with the first dusting of snow on the distant mountains, they exchanged vows in the small white church where they had once sat side by side as children. Fiona wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her slender frame, with a crown of autumn flowers in her golden hair. Xavier stood tall and proud in a new suit, his face alight with joy as he watched his bride walk toward him on her father's arm. "Dearly beloved," began Reverend Collins, beaming at the congregation that filled every pew. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Xavier Owens and Fiona Turner in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with many in attendance dabbing at tears as the couple spoke their vows. When Xavier placed the gold band on Fiona's finger to join her engagement ring, his voice rang clear through the church. "With this ring I thee wed, and pledge to you my eternal love and devotion." After the ceremony, the entire town gathered at the hotel for a celebration that lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and feasting, toasts and laughter, as Kingston celebrated the union of two of its own. As the newly married couple prepared to leave for their cabin, Mr. Turner pulled Xavier aside. "Take care of my daughter, son." Xavier clasped his hand firmly. "With my life, sir." Fiona embraced her father, tears shining in her eyes. "I'll only be a short ride away." "I know, daughter." He kissed her forehead. "But the store will seem empty without you." "You could come live with us," she suggested. "The cabin has room." Her father shook his head, smiling. "A new marriage needs space to grow. Besides, Elsie's brother has offered to help at the store. I'll be fine." With final embraces and well wishes, Xavier helped his bride into the wagon, now decorated with ribbons and flowers by the townsfolk. As they drove away toward their home, cheers and good wishes followed them into the night. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Xavier expanded the cabin, adding rooms for the family they hoped to have someday. Fiona still helped her father at the store several days a week, while also learning to manage their small homestead. In the spring of 1885, they planted their first garden together, filling the soil with seeds that promised summer bounty. Xavier began raising a small herd of cattle, his experience from years of ranch work proving invaluable. They weren't rich by any measure, but they were building a life together, just as they had dreamed as children. "You ever regret it?" Fiona asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky. Xavier looked at her curiously. "Regret what?" "Coming back to Kingston. Marrying me. We don't have much compared to what you might have found elsewhere." He laughed, pulling her closer to his side. "I spent 8 years chasing what I thought was important: money, success, proving myself. None of it meant anything without you." She rested her head on his shoulder, content in his embrace. "I was so angry with you for leaving, for not writing, but now I'm almost grateful for those years apart. They made us who we are." "And who are we, Mrs. Owens?" She smiled at the name she still hadn't quite gotten used to. "Two people who found their way back to each other against all odds. Two people who kept a promise made when they were just children." He kissed her then, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. "The first promise of many I intend to keep." As winter approached, Fiona began to suspect that their family would be growing sooner than they had planned. She waited until she was certain before sharing the news with Xavier. On Christmas morning 1885, as they sat before their fireplace exchanging modest gifts, Fiona handed Xavier a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" he asked, untying the string carefully. "Open it and see," she replied, her eyes sparkling with secret joy. Inside was a tiny pair of knitted booties. Xavier stared at them uncomprehendingly for a moment before understanding dawned on his face. "Fiona." His voice was barely a whisper. "Are you?" She nodded, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes. "In June, the doctor says." "We're having a baby, Xavier." With a cry of joy, he gathered her in his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop. "A baby," he repeated in wonder, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child. Are you happy?" She asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. Happy doesn't begin to describe it. He knelt before her, pressing a kiss to her abdomen. "Hello, little one. I'm your father, and I'm already so in love with you." Fiona stroked his hair, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had returned to keep his childhood promise and had given her more happiness than she had ever imagined possible. The news of the impending arrival spread quickly through Kingston. Mr. Turner was ecstatic at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, already making plans to craft a cradle for the baby. The women of the town organized a quilting bee to create a special blanket for the newest member of the community. As Fiona's body changed with the growing life inside her, Xavier became even more attentive. He insisted on taking over the heaviest chores, hired a local boy to help with the cattle, and made sure Fiona rested properly. "You're hovering again," she teased one afternoon in early spring as he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry she was perfectly capable of managing. "I'm taking care of my family," he corrected, setting the basket down near the clothesline. She touched his cheek fondly. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "Humor me," he said, covering her hand with his own. "I missed 8 years with you. I don't want to miss a moment now." On a warm June evening in 1886, after a labor that lasted from dawn until dusk, Fiona gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Xavier, who had paced outside their bedroom throughout her ordeal, was finally allowed in to meet his son. "He's perfect," Xavier whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his child for the first time. The baby had a tuft of dark hair like his father's and eyes that, when briefly opened, seemed to hold all the blue of the Nevada sky. "What shall we name him?" Fiona asked, exhausted but radiant. Xavier looked thoughtfully at his son. "Benjamin, after my father, and Thomas for yours." "Benjamin Thomas Owens," Fiona tried the name. "It suits him." As Xavier placed their son in her arms, he leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for this miracle, for everything." "We made him together," she reminded him softly, "just as we're building our life together." Little Benjamin, or Ben as they came to call him, thrived under the adoring eyes of his parents and grandfather. Xavier took to fatherhood with natural ease, never tiring of holding his son, singing to him, or telling him stories about the adventures he would have when he was older. Kingston continued to grow around them, with the silver mines bringing new prosperity to the area. Xavier's cattle business expanded, and he hired 2 full-time hands to help manage the growing herd. Fiona still worked at the general store 2 days a week, with baby Ben either sleeping in a cradle behind the counter or being doted on by his grandfather. In the spring of 1888, when Ben was nearly 2 years old and toddling everywhere with determined steps, Fiona discovered she was expecting their second child. Xavier was just as overjoyed as he had been the first time, immediately beginning plans to add another room to their now substantial home. What if it's a girl this time? He mused one evening as they sat on their porch swing, watching Ben chase fireflies in the yard. Then she'll have you wrapped around her little finger within minutes, Fiona predicted, smiling at the thought. Just like her mother, Xavier agreed, kissing her temple. Their daughter, Elizabeth Marie Owens, arrived in October 1888, a beautiful baby with her mother's golden hair and her father's warm brown eyes. Ben, initially wary of the tiny newcomer who demanded so much attention, soon appointed himself her protector, solemnly informing visitors that Lizzie is my sister with all the pride a 2-year-old could muster. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm for the Owens family. Xavier's cattle ranch prospered, allowing him to employ several local men and even expand into breeding horses. Fiona divided her time between caring for their children, helping at the store when needed, and managing their increasingly busy household. Mr. Turner remained at the general store but was a constant visitor to their home, delighting in his role as grandfather. In the summer of 1890, as Kingston celebrated its 20th anniversary as an incorporated town, Xavier was approached about serving on the town council. Me? He asked in surprise when Sheriff Miller brought up the subject. There must be more suitable candidates. You're respected, Xavier, the sheriff said. You've built a successful ranch, you employ half a dozen men, and everyone knows you're fair-minded. We need men like you helping to guide Kingston's future. Xavier discussed it with Fiona that evening after the children were asleep. What do you think? Should I accept? She considered the question carefully. Do you want to? I never thought about serving in such a capacity before, he admitted. But Kingston's been good to us. Maybe it's time to give something back. Then you should do it, she encouraged. You have good ideas, Xavier. The town would benefit from your perspective. With Fiona's support, Xavier accepted the nomination and was elected to the council that autumn. His practical approach to problem-solving and willingness to listen to all sides of an issue quickly made him a valued member of the group. As their children grew, so did their happiness. Ben started school in 1891, proudly carrying the lunch pail his grandfather had made for him. Elizabeth, or Lizzie as everyone called her, was a curious and lively child who followed her brother everywhere, demanding to be included in all his adventures. In 1892, 8 years after Xavier's return to Kingston, the Owens family welcomed their third child, another son they named James Frederick Owens. Jamie, as he was affectionately known, was a good-natured baby with a ready smile that charmed everyone who met him. 3 children, Xavier marveled one night as they stood in the nursery, watching Jamie sleep. Sometimes I still can't believe this life is real. Fiona leaned against him, his arm automatically encircling her waist. Remember how we used to play house when we were children? You'd be the father, I'd be the mother, and we'd pretend to have a family. And now we don't have to pretend. He kissed the top of her head. Reality is better than anything we imagined. As the children grew older, Xavier made a point of teaching them all the skills he had acquired during his years away from Kingston. Ben showed an early aptitude for horsemanship, spending hours with his father learning to ride and care for the animals. Lizzie, despite her mother's initial concerns, insisted on joining these lessons and proved to be just as capable as her brother. She's fearless, Xavier commented with pride after 8-year-old Lizzie successfully rode one of the gentler horses around the corral without assistance. Like someone else I knew at that age, Fiona replied, remembering the girl who had waded into creeks and climbed trees without hesitation. I hope she keeps that spirit, Xavier said. The world needs more fearless women. Little Jamie, 5 years old in 1897, was more interested in books and stories than horses, often sitting for hours with his grandfather, who taught him to read well before he started school. The boy had a quick mind and a gentle nature that reminded Fiona of Xavier's father, for whom Ben had been named. The turn of the century brought changes to Kingston, as it did to the rest of the nation. The railroad finally reached their small town in 1899, bringing increased commerce and connection to the wider world. Xavier, still serving on the town council, was instrumental in negotiating favorable terms for the railroad's passage through Kingston's lands. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Ben Owens turned 14, the same age Xavier had been when his family left Kingston. Looking at his son, Xavier was struck by how different Ben's childhood had been from his own. "I was already working full-time at his age," Xavier remarked to Fiona one evening. "After my father died, there wasn't much choice. You gave our children the security you lacked," Fiona said softly. "That's a tremendous gift, Xavier," he nodded thoughtfully. "I want them to have opportunities, but I also want them to understand the value of hard work and keeping one's word." "They learn that by watching you every day," she assured him. "The way you treat your workers, how you honor your commitments, they're learning what it means to be honorable from your example." The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. Ben graduated from Kingston's small high school in 1904 and chose to attend the agricultural college in Reno, studying modern farming and ranching techniques. Lizzie, 2 years behind him, declared her intention to become a teacher, inspired by the woman who had taught all the Owens children their letters and numbers. Jamie, the youngest, showed an aptitude for medicine after helping Dr. Wilson set a cowhand's broken arm. The elderly doctor began allowing the boy to observe his work, predicting that Jamie might someday take over his practice in Kingston. In 1906, the Owens family gathered to celebrate Xavier and Fiona's 22nd wedding anniversary. Their home, long since expanded from the original cabin, was filled with friends and family for the occasion. "A toast," Mr. Turner said, raising his glass. At 75, he was still spry, though his hair had turned completely white and his steps had slowed. "To my daughter and son-in-law, whose love story began when they were just children and continues to inspire us all." As glasses clinked around the room, Xavier squeezed Fiona's hand. "Best decision I ever made was coming back to Kingston," he whispered for her ears alone. "Best decision I ever made was waiting for you," she replied, her eyes reflecting the same love that had sustained them through the decades. Later that night, as they stood on their porch gazing at the stars that sparkled like diamonds in the vast Nevada sky, Xavier wrapped his arms around Fiona from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Remember when I promised I'd come back and marry you?" he asked. She leaned back against his chest, smiling at the memory. "I remember thinking it was the most romantic thing I'd ever heard, even at 12 years old." "I meant every word," he said, turning her to face him. "Even then, I knew there would never be anyone else for me." "I believe you now," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face, still handsome though lined with the years of sun and laughter. "It just took me a while to trust it." "We have a lifetime of memories now," Xavier mused. "Far more than the 8 years we were apart." "And many more to make," Fiona added, rising on her toes to kiss him. After all these years, his touch still sent a flutter through her heart. As the 20th century progressed, bringing automobiles and telephones to Kingston, the Owens family adapted to the changing times while maintaining the values that had always guided them. Ben returned from college to help run the ranch, eventually taking over much of its management as Xavier focused on his town council duties. Lizzie completed her education and became Kingston's schoolteacher, beloved by her students for her creativity and fairness. Jamie, after studying in San Francisco, returned to Kingston as Dr. Wilson's assistant, preparing to take over the practice when the older man retired. In 1916, as the United States watched the war in Europe with growing concern, Ben Owens married Sarah Mitchell, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Their wedding, held on the Owens Ranch with hundreds of guests in attendance, was the social event of the year in Kingston. "Another generation beginning," Xavier commented to Fiona as they watched the newlyweds share their first dance. At 52, Xavier's hair was streaked with silver, but he stood as tall and proud as ever. "It seems like just yesterday that was us," Fiona replied, her own golden hair now showing strands of gray. "Best day of my life," he said, pulling her close for a dance of their own. "Well, one of them at least. There have been so many." When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Jamie Owens volunteered as a medical officer, serving in field hospitals in France. The months of his absence were anxious ones for the family, especially when news came that he had been wounded. But Jamie returned home in 1919 with a Purple Heart, a French wife named Marie who had been a nurse in his hospital, and a determination to provide the best medical care possible to the people of Kingston. The 1920s brought prosperity to the Owens Ranch, as beef prices rose and Xavier's early investment in breeding quality horses paid dividends. Ben and Sarah welcomed 3 children during the decade, making Xavier and Fiona proud grandparents. Lizzie, who had chosen to remain unmarried, dedicated herself to improving Kingston's school, eventually becoming its principal. The Great Depression hit Nevada like the rest of the nation, but the Owens family weathered it better than most. Their ranch was debt-free, thanks to Xavier's insistence on saving during the good years. They employed as many local men as they could afford, often paying in food and housing rather than scarce cash. "My father always said a community takes care of its own," Xavier explained when questioned about his generosity during such hard times. "Kingston supported me when I returned with nothing but a promise to keep. I don't forget that kind of loyalty." In 1934, as they celebrated their 50th birthdays, Xavier surprised Fiona with a trip to San Francisco, something she had always wanted to experience but never had. They spent 2 weeks exploring the city, attending the opera, dining in fine restaurants, and walking hand in hand along the waterfront. "Was it worth waiting for?" Xavier asked as they stood on the deck of the ferry returning them to the mainland after a visit to Alcatraz Island. "Everything with you has been worth waiting for," she replied, the sea breeze playing with her hair. "From that first promise when we were 12 to this moment right now." Their golden wedding anniversary in 1934 was marked by a celebration that brought together not just their family, but most of Kingston. 50 years of marriage, 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and a legacy of love and service that had shaped their community. If someone had told that 12-year-old boy watching Kingston disappear behind him that he would return to build this life, I'm not sure he would have believed it, Xavier said during the celebration. But he would have hoped for it with all his heart. Fiona, elegant in a gown of soft gold silk, raised her glass to join his. "To promises kept," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "and to the love that made keeping them possible." As they moved into their 70s, Xavier and Fiona gradually stepped back from their more active roles. Ben had long since taken over management of the ranch, expanding it into one of the most successful operations in Nevada. Jamie's medical practice served not just Kingston but several surrounding communities, his reputation for skill and compassion drawing patients from miles around. Lizzie, though officially retired from teaching, still tutored children who needed extra help and served on the school board. In 1940, as another world war loomed on the horizon, Mr. Turner passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 91. The entire town turned out for his funeral, honoring the man who had helped build Kingston from its early mining days into a thriving community. "He was so proud of you," Xavier told Fiona as they stood by her father's grave, "of the life we built together." "He loved you like a son," she replied, leaning on his strength as she had for most of her life. "From the moment you came back to Kingston, he knew you would keep your promise." The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as life does. Some of their grandchildren served in World War II, returning with stories that made Xavier and Fiona grateful for the relative peace of their own lives. Great-grandchildren began to arrive, filling family gatherings with the laughter of new generations. In 1954, as they celebrated their 70th birthdays, Xavier and Fiona moved into a smaller house on the ranch property, allowing Ben and Sarah to take the main house. The cottage, as they called it, was cozy and perfect for their needs, with a wide porch where they could sit and watch the sunset over the Nevada mountains they had loved all their lives. 70 years old, Xavier marveled one evening as they sat in their matching rocking chairs. "When I made that promise to you, I couldn't imagine being this age. And yet here we are," Fiona said, reaching across to take his hand. "Still together." "Always together," he affirmed, squeezing her fingers gently. "That was the promise, wasn't it? Forever." As they entered their 80s, their pace slowed, but their love remained as strong as ever. They were the elders of Kingston now, respected and beloved, their story of childhood promises and enduring love a legend in the community they had helped to build. In the spring of 1964, as they celebrated their 80th birthdays and their 60th wedding anniversary, their entire extended family gathered at the ranch. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren. 5 generations of the Owens family, all stemming from a promise made between two 12-year-olds in 1876. "Tell us the story again, great-grandpa," urged one of the younger children as they all gathered on the lawn for a family photograph. Xavier, his hair now snow-white but his brown eyes still bright with life, looked at Fiona, who nodded encouragingly. "Well," he began, his voice slower than in his youth but still strong. "It all started when I was just a boy of 12, and the prettiest girl in Kingston had her nose pressed against the window of her father's general store." As he recounted their story for what must have been the 100th time, Fiona watched the faces of their descendants, some hearing it for the first time, others mouthing the familiar words along with Xavier. Their legacy, she thought, was not just in the ranch that bore their name or the buildings in Kingston they had helped to establish. It was in this, the story of a promise kept, of love that endured against all odds, of 2 lives intertwined so completely that they had become one unbreakable bond. Later that night, as they prepared for bed in their cottage, Xavier paused by the window, looking out at the stars that had witnessed their entire journey together. "I was thinking," he said softly, "about all the choices that led us here. If my family hadn't left Kingston, if I hadn't made that promise, if you hadn't waited." Fiona joined him at the window, wrapping her arm around his waist. "I believe we would have found our way to each other somehow. Some things are simply meant to be." "Like us," he agreed, turning to embrace her. At 80, Fiona's golden hair had turned silver, and her face bore the lines of a lifetime of laughter and tears. But to Xavier, she was still the girl who had stolen his heart when they were children. "Like us," she echoed, resting her head against his chest, hearing the steady heartbeat that had been the rhythm of her life for so long. "Forever, just as you promised." And as they had done every night for 60 years, they held each other close, grateful for another day together and the promise of tomorrow. Their love a testament to the power of a vow made in childhood and honored throughout a lifetime. In the years that followed, Xavier and Fiona continued to be the heart of the Owens family. Their 85th birthdays in 1969 coincided with man's first steps on the moon, and they watched the historic moment on television surrounded by their family, marveling at how the world had changed since their childhood in the 1870s. "From horse-drawn wagons to men on the moon," Xavier said in wonder. "What a journey we've witnessed." "Our own journey has been just as remarkable," Fiona replied, her hand finding his as it always did. They reached their 65th wedding anniversary in 1969, an achievement few couples attain. Kingston honored them with a special celebration, declaring Owens Day, in recognition of their contributions to the community over nearly 7 decades. In the winter of 1972, at the age of 88, Xavier Owens passed peacefully in his sleep, his hand still holding Fiona's as it had through most of their life together. He was laid to rest in the Kingston Cemetery, with a simple headstone that read, "Xavier Benjamin Owens, 1884–1972, he kept his promise." Fiona lived another 3 years, surrounded by the love of her family and the memories of the extraordinary life she had shared with Xavier. On her 90th birthday in 1974, she gathered her family around her and shared a final wisdom. "Love is the greatest gift we can give each other," she told them, her voice soft but clear. "Xavier promised me forever when we were just 12 years old, and though he is gone now, that promise remains unbroken. Love, if it's real, never truly ends." In the spring of 1975, Fiona Turner Owens joined her beloved Xavier, closing the final chapter of a love story that had spanned more than 9 decades. They were reunited at last, their legacy living on in the generations they had created and the community they had helped to build. The town of Kingston, Nevada continues to this day, and though it has changed with the times, the story of Xavier and Fiona Owens remains a cherished part of its history, a reminder that promises made with true hearts can withstand any test of time, and that love, in its purest form, is indeed forever.